Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we are going to be looking at
Turkey.
Turkey. Yeah, it's a big story, all over the headlines.
Really big protests happening right now.
Yeah, anti-government protests, huge protests happening. So for people who know a bit about Turkish politics already, this is all stemming from the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu. And this guy's a pretty prominent figure in the opposition. A lot of people see him as a potential challenger to President Erdoğan, down the line in 2028 elections, that sort of thing. So,
Yeah, maybe even sooner, right? With all this stuff going on, it's really changing the political landscape.
well, that's what we're going to try to figure out in this episode. So, I guess the first thing is what actually happened, what led to these protests in the first place.
Well, Imamoglu was arrested just recently, March 19th, and the charges are, pretty serious stuff: corruption, systematic fraud, bid rigging, bribery, embezzlement. Initially, there were even accusations that he aided the PKK, which is the Kurdistan Workers' Party, an outlawed group in Turkey. But those terrorism-related charges were dropped pretty quickly.
Okay, so those were dropped, but the financial crimes are moving forward. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. The courts are proceeding based on those allegations. But it's important to note that Imamoglu, he denies all of these charges, completely calling them baseless and politically motivated.
Yeah, I was going to say it's pretty convenient timing considering what happened with his university degree right before his arrest.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of this whole story.
Yeah, Istanbul University revoked his degree just like a day before he was arrested, and they cited some irregularities with his diploma transfer from a university in northern Cyprus.
Right, and it's so interesting because under Turkish law, you need a university degree to run for president. So revoking Imamoglu's degree basically throws a huge roadblock in front of any potential candidacy he might have.
Yeah, I mean, like you said before, even sooner than the 2028 elections, this could have implications for any upcoming election.
Absolutely. It just seems way too well timed to be a coincidence. Right before his arrest, they take away his eligibility. It's definitely adding fuel to the fire of the protests.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of protests, just how big are these things?
Huge. People are saying it's the largest anti-government protest wave that Turkey has seen in over a decade.
Wow, over a decade.
Yeah, tens of thousands of people are taking to the streets all over the country. Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, and they are defying these bans on public gatherings. They're coming out in force to make their voices heard.
Right. And are these protests, are they mostly peaceful, or is there...
For the most part, they are peaceful, people expressing their discontent, but unfortunately there have been some clashes with police.
Right.
The authorities have responded with tear gas, rubber bullets, water cannons, the whole deal. And there's been a lot of arrests, too, something like over 323 people detained just in the first few days.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the government is taking a pretty hardline approach here.
Oh, yeah. They've really tightened up security. They've imposed restrictions on public gatherings, even outright bans on demonstrations in some cities. It's a pretty strong response. And I think that's partly why people are comparing these protests to what happened back in 2013 with the Gezi Park demonstrations.
Oh, yeah, Gezi Park. That was a huge turning point in Turkish politics, wasn't it? So what are some of the parallels you're seeing between then and now?
Well, one thing is this idea of broader discontent. In 2013, it started with environmental concerns, but it quickly grew into this huge movement against government policies, authoritarianism, that kind of thing. And it seems like we're seeing something similar here. Imamoglu's arrest might have been the spark, but it's really tapping into these deeper frustrations that people have with the economy, the justice system, the lack of press freedom. Some people are even calling for Erdoğan's resignation.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about Imamoglu then. It's like this is a symptom of a larger problem.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes this situation so significant. It's not just about one arrest. It's about these underlying tensions in Turkic society that have been building for a long time.
Yeah, okay, so I guess now we have to talk about Erdoğan himself. How's he responding to all of this, to the protests, to the accusations that this was a politically motivated arrest?
Well, he's standing firm. He's defending the legal process, saying that the judiciary is independent and that there's no political motivation behind any of this. He's even gone so far as to call the protests street terrorism.
Yeah.
Saying that the government won't tolerate unrest.
Street terrorism, that's some pretty strong language.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it shows how the government is framing these protests as a threat to national security rather than legitimate expressions of public concern.
So basically they're saying this is not just people being upset about corruption or an unfair arrest.
Yeah.
This is a direct attack on the state.
That's right. And I think that kind of rhetoric could potentially be used to justify a more forceful response from the government.
All right, okay, so we've got the government on one side and then there's the opposition. How are they reacting to all of this?
Well, it seems like Imamoglu's arrest has really galvanized the opposition forces. They've become much more unified in their response.
In what way?
Well, for example, the CHP, which is the main opposition party, they organized this nationwide solidarity ballot to show support for Imamoglu, and the turnout was huge. Over 15 million people participated. And what's really interesting is that something like 13 million of those people weren't even members of the CHP.
So it's not just party loyalists coming out to support him. This is like average citizens.
Yeah, exactly. It suggests that there's much broader public sympathy for Imamoglu and concern about what's happening.
And are the CHP still planning to put Imamoglu forward as their candidate for president, even though he's, detained and might not be eligible?
Yeah, they're moving ahead as planned. Their primary election to choose a candidate happened just as scheduled, and they endorsed Imamoglu despite his imprisonment.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold move.
So are they just hoping that he'll be released in time, or?
Well, I think it's more about sending a message, showing their unwavering support for him and for what he represents.
Right, of course. And how about the other opposition figures? Are they on the same page here?
Yeah, for the most part, there seems to be a lot of unity in their condemnation of the government's actions. A lot of the rhetoric is comparing this to mafia tactics, accusing Erdoğan of weaponizing the judiciary to eliminate his rivals.
Wow, okay, that's pretty harsh. And what about internationally? How is the rest of the world reacting to all this?
Well, there's been quite a bit of criticism. The Council of Europe has called for Imamoglu's immediate release, and Germany has said that his imprisonment is a serious setback for democracy in Turkey.
Yeah, I can see why there would be international concern. This isn't just an internal Turkish matter. It has implications for the country's relationships with its allies and for its image on the world stage.
Exactly. And I think it also reflects this growing global concern about democratic backsliding. We're seeing this trend in various parts of the world, and Turkey's definitely a key player on the international stage. So what happens there is watched very closely.
Yeah, that makes sense. So looking ahead then, what are some of the potential implications of all this? The next scheduled election in Turkey is in 2028, but I have a feeling things might not stay quiet until then.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure, but with all this unrest, there's definitely a possibility of early elections.
And even if the elections don't happen sooner than planned, Imamoglu's arrest has still, fundamentally changed the political landscape, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's no going back to the status quo. His
That-
supporters are vowing to keep protesting until he's released, and his trial is going to continue in the coming weeks. So this is going to remain a major issue in Turkish politics for the foreseeable future.
So what can we expect to see from both sides? The government and the opposition as this all plays out.
Well, the CHP, they've announced that they're going to hold an emergency party congress in April, which is widely seen as a move to prepare for any potential attempts by the government to try to, weaken or even disband the party.
Right, so they're getting ready for a fight.
Yeah, it seems like they're expecting things to escalate. And on the other side, I think it's safe to say that the Erdoğan administration is likely to continue cracking down on the opposition and tightening restrictions on dissent even further.
Okay, so potentially more protests, more crackdowns. This is a really tense situation.
Definitely. And it's one that could have far-reaching consequences for Turkey, both domestically and internationally.
Absolutely. So to sum up what we've discussed today, we've seen these huge protests erupt in Turkey, sparked by the arrest of Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, a key figure in the opposition. This whole thing has raised serious concerns about democracy, the rule of law in Turkey, and the future of the country's political direction is very much up in the air.
Yeah. And for you, the listener who follows these kinds of global events, yeah, this is a really pivotal moment. What does all this mean for Turkey? What does it mean for the country's relationship with the rest of the world? These are important questions, and we're going to have to see how things unfold in the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely well said. If you've been listening along and you found this deep dive insightful and want to learn more, we always encourage you to do your own research. Dig a little deeper into the nuances of Turkish politics and stay informed about the latest developments. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, leave a comment. We love hearing from you. And we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a different corner of the world.
See you next time.
See you then.